what you have witnessed. And maybe, Bruce, let me start with you first. You have heard conversations on the dinner table, you've been on some of the sessions here. How different are the ideas and the concerns and the opportunities that are discernible from what you've heard in this hall to the other rooms you have in different parts of the world? What is similar, what is different, and what is it that excites you?
Thank you. And look, I'm simply excited to be here. I think it's extremely important that India deepens this perspective of its maritime capability and its maritime future. The themes, to my mind, are similar to what I hear in other settings, but the population is completely different, and that's what's exciting to me, to have a different cast of characters embracing these issues, thinking about new routes, new technologies, and new ideas, which is what we need in this space. The maritime industry is as old as humankind. But in the contemporary moment, we need new partnerships and new ways of thinking about how we're going to remake globalization. Bulk shipping completely remade globalization in the last 40 years. Globalization needs to be remade again, and India has a huge role to play in that.
Yeah, so on India's role, here is a question to you. Sitting in the US, you had a certain imagination of India in the last century, a different one in the first couple of decades of this century, and now you are coming here and you're seeing India. You've seen the Minister of Shipping, you've seen Sanjeev earlier in this conference talk about building a maritime footprint, a maritime industry, a maritime presence. His famous line, 10% in 10 years, 10% of ships and 10% of flags. In some sense, you heard all of that. What does it mean for you? Does it provide an opportunity for you? Is it complicating the world order, as it were? How does someone sitting in the US see it? Someone sitting in the US, which is now going to be run by President Trump?
Look, to my mind, if we think about the major geopolitical challenges that we confront, the challenges that we confront in globalization, and climate change, all three issues improve if India seriously develops its maritime capability. And by that I mean commercial shipping, ocean research, and naval power, and the three go together. And it's not right to think about the one without the others. That's been missing in some cases. So I think all of our options improve if India is serious about building that maritime perspective, and to do so with the right kind of technologies and in the right partnership. So I'm very bullish about all this.
And how would, you necessarily, you are a radical independent, but let me ask you, do you think the Trump administration would have a similar assessment of India's role and India's engagement with the maritime sector?
I think broadly, yes. Look, I think these issues are not driven by personality so much as by facts. The big fact that the United States has to confront is the Chinese fleet. And I mean both the naval fleet and the merchant fleet, right? And kind of this huge dominance of commercial shipping and shipbuilding now from China. The naval problem becomes quite acute. That's a fact. Whoever is president, that's a driving fact of American foreign policy. India, I think, is the great opportunity in those terms. So I don't know specifically how Trump will approach this. He was pretty positive towards India in his past administration. We were discussing this backstage. My view is that the American establishment writ large has kind of a very positive perspective on India. Maybe there's some differences here and there, but there's a very positive perspective on India. So I think we'll probably see a willingness to embrace that. How far it goes, will we be willing to partner on shipbuilding, et cetera? There's lots of antibodies against those things in the American system. Bad old regulation that we need to deal with. But strategically, the obvious opportunity is there.
Sanjeev, may I turn to you now? And you've heard his view on whether it's globalization, whether it's climate change, and perhaps I would add, even if it is in defense of the rules-based order, India's investment in the maritime space is crucial for all three, in a broad sense. You have been arguing, and perhaps you've been sometimes a lonely voice that has been wanting us to get our feet wet and to dive into the seas and oceans and embrace it. Besides this being a prestige project, a Sanjeev Sanyal project, a project that kind of stems from the book you wrote some years ago, which is a bestseller. By the way, pick it up, it's called The Oceans of Churn. But besides that being a prestige project, are there facts that are shaping this Indian new mood to build an oceans?
So it's not a prestige project at all. The book itself is an attempt to change India away from our landlocked view of the universe. So let me explain what the problem is. We will, in maybe 24 months, 36 months, we'll become the world's third largest economy. Yeah. Now let me tell you, already 95% of our merchandise trade is carried by foreign ships. 95%. Paying for that shipping freight and other insurance, etc., is, I think, our second or third largest import. Okay? This is ridiculous just from an economic perspective. Now, look at the danger of this from a strategic perspective. Let's say there is a geopolitical incident which places us in a situation where 3 or 4 of the large shipping lines in the world decide to stop carrying our goods. We would be on our knees within weeks. This is an absolutely dangerous situation. I would argue that this is now the single biggest danger to national security, not being able to...
You mentioned a number, less than 500 long-range ships.
Absolutely. We have Indian has only 1,500 cargo ships. 1,500, it's less than 1,500 in fact. Of which 486 are really for long-range international trade. Now, 1.4 billion people with 486 ships, you've got to be kidding me. We are a country that's dependent on all kinds of things, from oil to name it, on shipping and trading with other countries. Those countries may be entirely willing to trade with us. It's just that we can't get it there or bring stuff back. So this is an economic danger. It's a strategic danger, but also, very importantly, it's a huge opportunity that's just staring us in the face. So just think about it. Okay? We're one of the few countries in the world which can build aircraft carriers, nuclear subs today. Okay? Now, shipbuilding is one of those activities that needs young people, because in the end, it's about a lot of welding. We have a long coastline, and we ourselves need a lot of trade. So we have the technology, we have the people, we have the coastline, we have the steel, and yet we are not participating in what is a hugely lucrative business, which we need economically and we need strategically. Now, this is, in my mind, an absolute no-brainer.
Sanjeev, I'm going to come back to you. I want you to hold that thought, but I want to ask you, in a country where everyone who's graduating or even not graduating with a college degree wants to be in a startup, how do you make the shipping industry and the oceans economy more attractive to them?
Lots of stuff to do in shipping. My God, you can start with engines, and engines of all kinds. India probably can build the hull. We can build all this rest of the stuff. But in case there are any engineers in there, we still don't have the capability of building high-end, particularly green turbines and engines for ships. So, huge opportunity if anybody knows how to do this stuff.
Bruce, less than 500 long-range shipping capacity for 1.4 billion people. You have less than 100 in the US for 300 million people. The liberal order is being shipped on authoritarian ships.
Partly. There's lots of Japanese and Korean ships too, usefully. And here's the irony of the issue. The Chinese ships are all made with liberal steel. So there's a very strange world we live in where we sell steel to China, they build their navy, we have to fight. It's crazy. But the essential point remains that we have outsourced the commercial side of our maritime life. We still have a powerful navy, we still have the world's best oceanographic institutes, but we have completely outsourced the maritime side of our life. And that creates a similar vulnerability. It's not just the shipping, by the way, it's also the manufacturing. But anyway, the vulnerability is there. There is no way that the United States is going to be able to rebuild its shipyards and its shipbuilding capability fast enough without serious partnerships. That's neuralgic in the United States, but I think we're beginning to see a change in that perspective, getting the South Koreans to invest in the Philly shipyard, potential partnerships with both South Korea and Japan, and I think that should extend farther. And so I'll be very interested to see, and I'll continue to push for an extension of that approach of rebuilding the shipbuilding industry, not purely as an American thing, but as a consortium of countries who are willing to play by a certain set of rules and are willing to have a common strategic perspective. India, I think, can be part of that, and the United States can be part of that.
But Bruce, let me stay with you, and I'm going to pose the same question to Sanjeev with a slight variation. But the question to you, this is a capital-intensive sector. You would require significant investments, both public and private, to be able to invest either within your own country or with partner countries to create capacities that serve a rules-based order, that serve the like-minded countries who are trying to keep trade free and open and prevent weaponization of supply chains and supply lines. Is the Trump America going to be isolationist, insulationist, ambiguous, or embrace this opportunity that Sanjeev describes of actually remaking globalization that is more purposeful and more effective?
Two things. It's capital intensive to do shipbuilding, but man, it's a lot less expensive than dealing with the vulnerabilities of not having shipbuilding. Look, we haven't even talked here about undersea infrastructure. $10 trillion a day moves in undersea cables that go across between New York and London. How expensive is it not to have the capability to repair those ships? We saw yesterday a financial cable between Germany and Finland being severed. It's going to take, the costs of not having the shipbuilding capacity to manage this stuff are much, much higher than the cost of building. And by the way, what we've seen in the last several years is that Congress has been willing to authorize substantial funding for shipbuilding, for shipyards, for the submarine industrial base. Money is not the problem. We have to reinvent the workforce is the problem. We've lost the workforce, and that takes time. On the second question, sorry, your second question was?
Insulationist, isolationist, or embracing the opportunity to remake the world?
I was thinking about this yesterday. I suspect there'll be lots of variation, there'll be competing personalities, etc. I suspect the through line will be what I call unilateral internationalism.
Unilateral internationalism. Okay.
It's not.
But that's basically American policy for the last 75 years.
Well, there's been a heavier emphasis on alliances in some than in others.
Okay.
A heavier emphasis on traditional alliances than in others. But I think what we see with Trump, and to a certain extent with Biden too, is a kind of a greater reference back to American power itself, a little more skepticism about some of the alliances, an embrace of others, and a willingness to be in partnership on a fairly practical basis. I don't know that that's the kind of core of the thinking, but if I look at the personalities that are starting to emerge, I think that notion of an internationalism that is a little less dependent on the traditional allies, but is nonetheless sort of engaged in the world is quite likely.
So that means it's an opportunity for non-alliance partners such as India to play a more eminent, prominent role.
I suspect so.
Okay. Sanjeev, from an Indian perspective, we have created a Maritime Development Fund. I'm sure it has a limitation of size. It's not necessarily going to create help you reach the targets that you have outlined. What are the kind of partnerships we are looking for? Is Europe and its Global Gateway project an opportunity? Is the new Trump administration and their determination to build trustworthy supply lines and supply chains, again, something that we should be counting on? How is India looking at funding and fueling its maritime ambitions?
So as far as international linkages are concerned, the two linkages that are critical to this are going to be Korea and Japan. Mm-hmm. You have to know that shipbuilding is a young man's job. It's a lot of welding. You cannot computerize this. You cannot use robots. You have to climb up and down scaffolding and weld pieces together and then sail them. Indians already count for some 20% of the world sailors. I don't know if people know this.
I think this morning they said some 10 to 15%.
No, it is now very close to 20%. Okay. So it's a very high proportion of it's the single largest source of sailors in the world today. Now, there is no way Korea and Japan can sustain this. They just don't have the young people. They become too rich. It's a rough and sometimes dangerous work. So this is something that India is ripe to take from them. I have a feeling that Korean and Japanese companies will be pleased to send it to a country like India if we create the systems of receiving it. So part of it is on our end of creating the
Policy ecosystem.
the real estate, etc., that is needed for taking this business. I don't think they would be unhappy about parting with it, number one. Secondly, there are also countries like the US, we just discussed, which are actually an opportunity. For example, we are likely to buy American aircraft into the foreseeable future, commercial particularly. Why can't America buy our ships?
So engines for ships.
Engines for ships. Engines are basically for fighter jets.
Correct.
But I'm saying for passenger, most of what we will buy will basically be passenger aircraft. And a lot of it will come from Boeing or Lockheed or whatever. Why not have the idea that we can become the Boeing of shipbuilding?
And you know, the Indian Prime Minister, and I'm just staying with you, Sanjeev, the Indian Prime Minister has, over the last couple of years, and I must say, perhaps through his 10 years or 11 years now, focused a lot on Europe. I think the EU-India relationship has been transformed under Prime Minister Modi, particularly the emphasis he has paid on, even his recent invitee list includes the Greece Prime Minister, the Italian Prime Minister, the IMEC partnership at the G20. What is Europe's role in this? And they have traditionally been the custodians of global shipping in some sense.
So when you think of Europe from a maritime perspective, it's a very different one. So when you think of the European Union generally, you think of Germany or France or something. But when you think in maritime terms, you have to think of Greece.
And Italy.
Not the usual European Union countries people conjure up in their heads when they are thinking of it. So, as I said, the maritime worldview is a very important one. Once you think in a maritime framework, everything begins to look quite different. So, as I said, even geostrategically, who are our neighbors when you think in a landlocked way? It's a friendly neighbor to our west and the one to our northeast. Whereas if you think in maritime terms...
Emphasis on the word friendly, right?
Yes, extremely friendly. But then if you think in maritime terms, our neighbors are Singapore, Australia, UAE, Kenya,
and suddenly the neighborhood
Oman.
looks much brighter.
It looks totally different. And it's not something I've invented today. You look through our entire history, these are countries with who we have very long links. I mean, Indonesia is called Indonesia.
Correct.
Its national currency is the rupiah. They in fact have the correct pronunciation, not our. Rupee is actually the wrong...
It's anglicized.
Anglicized version of it.
Correct.
So the rupiah. So here is a country that actually names itself Indonesia, uses the rupiah as its currency. Its national symbol is the Vishnu's Garuda. So it's not some theoretical thing from that, I have just thinking up, looking at a map. These things have existed for thousands of years.
No, and maybe just for a quick snapshot of this project you are undertaking, the stitched board project, just for the audience who are here from different parts and those who are watching this online, the stitched board project that you are currently in the middle of, and what are you trying to do with it?
So it's part of something I set out to do a little over a decade ago, because I felt very strongly about this maritime, the landlocked problem, the landlocked worldview we had of ourselves. So I said the first way to change that is to just write a book about it, which is what Ocean of Churn was about. And then I have been advocating various maritime type things. But I thought the best way to capture the next generation's imagination is to actually demonstrate it physically. So in order to do this, what I decided is I'm going to build a ship with a 1500-year-old design from the Gupta period. So it's a ship which will be built with the design of that time, which does not have any nails in it. It'll be stitched together, like what used to be done in that time. And it's currently being built in Goa, at a shipyard there. And the idea is that by this time next year, it will be hopefully sailing around when we have figured out how it sails. Because it's got ancient technology. We don't understand exactly how all of it works. But assuming we have figured it all out and it's still sailing around, and we're confident of it, then we'll attempt a voyage to Oman.
And that was a traditional route.
That was one of the traditional routes on the west coast. And if the Oman trip works out well, we will attempt a longer voyage from Odisha, which is then called Kalinga, all the way to Bali. In fact, even today there's a festival in Odisha called Bali Jatra. In fact, just happened 4 days ago. which literally means the voyage to Bali. So they still celebrate that voyage to Bali every year, Kartik Purnima. I'm going to actually attempt to do it literally.
On the festival, at the festival
On the
time.
festival day. You can only do it at the festival time because that's when the winds are conducive.
So that's how the monsoon
Yeah,
works.
so the winds blow from the north southward during the Kartik Purnima. This is November, that's when the winds
So
change.
when the monsoon flips.
When the monsoon flips, that's the only time, if you are using a square sail, you can only sail with the wind. So that was when they used to sail down along the coast to Mahabalipuram, then further down south to Nagapattinam, then to Sri Lanka, then use the current to go across to Sumatra, and then you had a choice of going down the Malacca Straits or go along the west side past Java to Bali. So we'll have to choose one of the two routes, but yeah,
So
that's
best
how.
of luck on that. Now, Bruce, you have a book, Rule the Waves, and you have a new book which you're very secretive about that's coming out soon. What are you arguing for in this particular space?
In the new book or
Both of them, why not?
Yeah, look, it's very similar. I mean, I wrote To Rule the Waves to try to, once again, sort of inject this reality of the extent to which our lives are shaped by the oceans, but we've become completely sea blind. In the United States and the West, we've become completely sea
Listen,
blind.
sorry to interrupt you. You also mentioned something interesting backstage, and you said that you agreed with Sanjeev and you said even the US has a landlocked view of itself.
100%.
And you have like
Yeah.
the Pacific Command, Indo-Pacific Command, and you have
Yeah.
like,
And the Navy is this kind of extraordinary symbol of American power and et cetera, but commercially, in our own culture, we've become very landlocked in our view. We've become very sort of non-maritime in our view. So I'm trying to do what I can. Brent Sadler and others here are sort of doing similar things to inject back into the American political discourse, American thinking, the importance of the oceans. By the way, it's a striking fact, we have become sea blind during a period when the US economy went from about 10% dependent on global trade in the 80s to about 30% dependent on trade. All of that being sea-based trade, 100% of it, right? The US economy relies, and the global economy relies on the dollar. Dollar transactions move undersea undersea cables, right? 97% of all data in the world move undersea. We're completely and totally dependent on the flow of goods and data and energy by sea, and we pay no attention to it. And even in our naval power is designed to do very specific things. It is not designed to protect undersea infrastructure. It is not designed to secure commercial trade. It's just not how we think of it anymore. So I'm in the business of trying to get people to remember how important these things are and design the commercial, the naval, and the scientific fleets to support it. The book that I'm working on now takes those issues and looks underseas. Submarine warfare, deep sea mining, undersea cables, hugely consequential and strategic and commercial and in scientific terms. And again, a little bit, it's easier to be sea blind about what's undersea, but I'm trying to draw attention to what's happening beneath the waves. Submarine programs is a major part of it, but also deep sea mining, deep sea matting, and undersea cables.
As we approach the last 5 minutes of this conversation, I thought I'll pick up your thoughts on a couple of issues that we heard during the conference. One of them was, of course, around the Arctic and the Arctic route. And in your opinion, when the traditional route to Europe reduces from 26,000 kilometers, as someone explained this morning, to 11,000 kilometers, or literally halves, what does it do to the global economic landscape, the geopolitical landscape, and how do countries like the US and India partner in this scenario where you will have to not only manage rivals, but also friendly countries who don't want you there. In some sense, it is the no-go zone, but it is opening up and it's inviting all comers to engage with that. So one is Arctic and new routes that may open up besides just the Arctic. How do we plan for those? And how do economic planners, policy planners think about those possibilities when we design our action plans? And the second, what do we do with new materials? Rich countries that were literally powering their growth on fossil fuels build infrastructure to carry those fossil fuels to their factories and to their processing units, wherever they were in the world. Today, new fuels are being used by countries with more modest economics. Rare earth is being basically forced upon countries who are now being asked to embrace green transitions, which itself is costly for their economies. How are they going to build infrastructure for the movement of rare earth? So when we move to new materials, who is going to build infrastructure, ports, logistics, and connectivity for those materials? We heard new materials and new critical minerals that are going to define our future. We heard about the Arctic. Your thoughts on these two big changes that confront us?
Let me take the first one, and I know less about the second. I'll say two things about the Arctic route. First of all, obviously the two countries that are poised to profit most from the Arctic route are China and Russia, and we've already seen collaboration between shipping firms and the two to kind of take advantage of that. Now, it makes sense if we still live in a world, as the Arctic increasingly opens up, where the dominant manufacturing flows are from China to Europe and the United States. That's the world we live in now. It's not the world I would prefer to live in. The world I would prefer to live in would see a connection between your IMEC and the Atlantic basin, right? So one of the things that this administration did in the ocean space is called the Partnership for Atlantic Cooperation, recognizing the Atlantic is still the largest source of flows for both data and energy, okay? Fishing, all sorts of stuff. And so actually connecting the west coast of Africa, the west coast of Europe, the east coast of the United States, and the east coast of North America and the east coast of Latin America. That's a very powerful thing if it could be.
So from the Indo-Pacific to the Mid-Atlantic.
Yeah, I mean, for me, we should be thinking about the kind of Indo-Atlantic future, right? And that can encompass a lot of things. Then, okay, the Arctic can still be there, that route can still be there, but we don't want to be increasing our reliance on Chinese shipping and Chinese manufacturing. That's the wrong way to go strategically. So we need to build the routes and the partnerships and the ships. By the way, it's very interesting. Reducing the time for the flows, good. But one of the things, interesting sort of ironies we've learned from the Red Sea, attacking shipping, disrupting that trade route. Immediately we thought, oh, there's going to be this huge spike in costs. And actually there really wasn't, because there had been so much shipping procurement and the kind of profits came out of COVID. We had enough ship supply. Yeah, the route takes longer. But actually it's a kind of, shipping has become so inexpensive relative to everything else that, okay, a little bit of delay, a little extra cost in the transportation is almost unnoticeable in the final cost of the manufactured good. And so we can afford to take a little bit slower time to ship if it changes the geopolitics of what's on the boat.
So we have to be cautious before we jump into some of these more seemingly lucrative options and build something which is more dependable, resilient.
I believe so.
Right? Sanjeev, you want to come in?
So let me tell you that the attempt to go through the northern route to Asia from Europe has at least a 500-year history. So there were many companies, just when the East India Company was being created, to take the eastern route, there were also with these other companies that were trying to actually find the route through the northern. So the attempts to find the northern route are not new.
Okay.
Now we think because of climate change it may change, and maybe it will, that is what will happen. But let me tell you, those waters are very, very treacherous. So even if it works for a part of the year, the likelihood that it will work all year round, at least in the foreseeable future, now maybe 200 years from now, climate has so much changed that it's this thing, but at least in any reasonable policy-making horizon, that I cannot see the northern route replacing the southern routes in any meaningful way.
And what about securing supplies and infrastructure for the new minerals that we are moving now from?
No, obviously this requires us to think about the world totally differently. And here I'm going to specifically, because we have limited time, we have to begin looking at stuff that is under the oceans in areas that are not in anybody's economic zone. There are huge chunks of the ocean that are not occupied by anybody's economic zone, and anybody who maps it better and has the capability of sucking up these minerals or establishing sort of...
So ocean science comes into play again.
Yes, and brute force in some cases. Because you need to have the ability to simply stand on top of whatever you are sucking up of the seafloor and, stake your... It doesn't require an existing shoal or island there, because, your ship is the island.
So, final question to all of you. Sanjeev, of course, got engaged with the opportunity. I am getting engaged. I'm now asking you a question on more about human choices and human behavior. How do we make oceans and the blue economy a sector that is exciting, that invites the youngsters to come and embrace it, and that creates the buzz on Instagram. You know, being a startup dude or a woman leader is very different from saying I'm working on the fisheries sector of the coast. More important, by the way. But how do we give it a certain appeal so that young people, and many of them are here, we had, like I mentioned, a large number of students who have come to, how do we make it more exciting for the youth, to make it relatable to them, to make it something that excites them to embrace it?
So in my particular case,
I mean, your ship is one of those.
my ship is one of them. My books are about that. This event is a good way of getting into a more formal way because it, you know, you ultimately become the stories you tell yourself. For a very long time, the British told themselves the stories that they were basically sailors. So they went and sailed all over the world. So did much of Europe. So, you know, so it is ultimately, you know, our mental makeup ultimately determines the choices the next generation makes. And that is why I'm putting in such an effort into trying to retell our entire history as a coastal history as opposed to the history of Delhi.
Bruce?
Yeah, absolutely. 2 points. I mean, one, by the way, it's worth saying, yes, there are parts of shipbuilding that are very sort of traditional workforce, et cetera, but there are also parts that are very high tech. And actually the kind of high-tech design is really some of the cutting edge that we're seeing. You know, the new Constellation-class destroyer that's being built in the United States by Fincantieri uses AI-enabled welding, right? So there's all these ways in which technology, we've sort of come around the edge to where AI and physical labor are sort of fused again. And so to repaint the image of shipbuilding and of the maritime space as a very high-tech space, not very high-tech, but at least a technology-enabled space will matter. But I agree with what you said. This is about storytelling. It's why I wrote my book. I don't think it sold as many copies as your book, but nonetheless, it's about storytelling. It's about recapturing the sense of imagination and of understanding the stakes of how much of our lives is shaped by the sea. I will say, by the way, the way in which the oceans move weather around the world, your monsoons, which will take you, etc. Everything that we know about climate change comes out of naval research from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, right? Understanding the oceans is a hugely important part of how we understand the world around us. It's why I always insist on keeping the ocean sciences as part of this. It's not just the commercial or the naval, but the ocean sciences too. And for young people who are interested in climate issues, the ocean sciences are a key factor. So there are lots of ways we can do this, but it does require storytelling in the end.
No, I think this is a good note to end this conversation, the power of imagination. We have to imagine ourselves, we have to tell stories of ourselves that compel us, motivate us, inspire us to embrace a far more rich and diverse opportunity landscape that the oceans offer all of us today. It's a time to remake globalization, redesign globalization, and that redesigning and remaking is going to happen at sea. And I think it's time that partners such as India and the US and many others in this room rethink the partnerships as well, and perhaps an ocean-first partnership framework should define the future. Please join me in applauding these wonderful gentlemen for their interventions. And before we close for this evening and part ways to meet again soon, I want to show you on screen a constellation of superstars who were responsible for putting together this conference in the last 90 days. May I request my colleagues for that rather complex slide that they have put together. It takes a village to bring a conference to town. Please join me in applauding all of them. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you again next year. So keep your feet wet, and there are opportunities that await all of us. Thank you so much. Signing off from SAGARMANTHAN to all the online viewers as well, and we'll see you again soon. Namaskar.
Well done. Okay, we have to stand here.